Okay, my name is Scott Johnson, and today I'm going to be talking about a podcast promotion strategy called podcast promo trades. It's something that I've used and continue to use, and I'm pretty excited about the results. There's lots of potential here, and it can actually get pretty crazy. So what exactly is a promo trade? Well, it's actually pretty simple. It's just two podcasts, and they agree to promote each other. In other words, podcast A tells their listeners about podcast B, and podcast B tells their listeners about podcast A. Now, of course, there are more details involved, but that's the simplified way to understand it. But that just defines the mechanics of it. What are really exciting are the results from it. And when I say I get excited about the results, what does that mean exactly? Well, it just means more listeners. That's what we all want, right? More listeners to our podcasts. And that's exactly what you get when you do a promo trade the right way. Actually, you'd probably still get new listeners even if you screwed it up, but we're going to make sure that doesn't happen. So here's what I'm going to do. There are three types of promo trades, and I've given each one a name or kind of a label based on how powerful it is. The firecracker, the grenade, and the nuclear bomb. So I'm going to give you a quick glimpse of each of them first, and then we'll take a deep dive into each one and talk about the nuts and bolts and how you can use any of these, or all three of them if you want to get more listeners to your show. First one is what I call the firecracker. This graph is from July 2019, so about a year ago, and what it's showing is daily downloads for my podcast. Back then, the average daily downloads for my show was probably around 200 a day. So you can see the high points, which of course are the days I released a new episode. That's pretty much the same and very predictable for every podcast. You know, the downloads spike on new release days. But then July 24, that's the day I set off the firecracker promo trade. And that day was higher than what the average day was in between episodes. But what I've seen happen every time is this. It's a few days after the promo trade that things really happen. And you can see the second day after was about on par with a new release. And then the next 3 days are when the downloads really increased before it started to gradually come back down. The second one is what I call the grenade. This graph is from February 2020. You can see the new episode on February 14. Then on February 17, that's when I launched the grenade promo trade. And as we saw before, that specific day was higher than the average number of downloads, but it was the next few days that really saw the higher numbers. In this case, the high day didn't quite match the downloads of a typical new release day for a new episode, but the effect overall was stretched out over a few days before the daily downloads eventually got back to what they normally were. So that's the grenade. And for number 3, we pull out the big guns. This one is what I call the nuclear bomb. It takes more effort to make it happen, but the results are exponentially stronger. This is from April of this year, 2020. And I'm going to make this a little bigger so you can see it. As you can see, starting from the left end of the graph, April 21, April 22, just pretty steady downloads, maybe a few hundred a day. April 24 was a new episode, which bumped me up to about 1,500 downloads for that day. Then on April 28 was when the nuclear bomb was dropped. That day went over 4,000 downloads. Next day, over 5,000. A couple of days later, over 6,000. But what's really great is how many days those higher numbers continued. There were several more days of 3,000 to 4,000, and then I had another new episode and went up to about 5,500 that day, and then it stayed above 2,000 downloads a day for at least a couple of weeks. So for 15 to 20 days, my daily download number was 10 times what I was getting before. But hey, when you use something called the nuclear bomb, you expect some things to explode, right? So we're going to go into each one of those methods in just a minute, and I'll tell you all the details on how each one works and what you need to do. But there's one thing you have to do before you can get into any of that. You have to find another podcast to do this swap with. We all know that right now there are over 1 million podcasts in existence, so I guarantee you there are a bunch of them that would be a good match for your show to do a trade with, and you only need to find one, at least right now, for your first promo trade. Once you do one, you're definitely going to want to do more, but right now all you need is one. So how do you find another podcast that would be a good match for you to trade promos with? Well, the two big things I look at are the category or the genre of the podcast and the size of your audience. Or in other words, how many downloads you have per episode. Now we'll look at these individually. First, think about what category your podcast is in. Apple Podcasts lists a bunch of different categories, and every single podcast falls into one of those categories, and each category has a lot of podcasts in there. So let's just say, for an example, let's say you do a true crime podcast. That makes it pretty easy. There are obviously a lot of people who listen to true crime podcasts, and yet they've never heard of your show. And there are people who listen to your show who may not be aware of some of the other true crime shows. I mean, come on, let's face it. Out of 1 million podcasts in existence, at least half of them are true crime, right? So just look at some of the other podcasts that are listed right there next to yours in Apple Podcasts. Those are some of your potential trade partners. But here's where it pays to know who your audience actually is. Now, as you might already know, for true crime podcasts, the demographic is largely female. I can't tell you why that's the case, but that's just the way it is. So you might consider what shows are maybe not right in the true crime category, but are made up of mostly females, like your show is. One example might be the Women's Meditation Network podcast. Obviously, that one's all females, right? So try to think outside the box a bit and just make sure the podcast you trade with has the audience you want to reach, and vice versa. And I really couldn't resist using this image of Katie Kremitzos meditating in contrast with the crazy knife guy. I know it seems kind of odd, but all that matters really is that your show and the other show have the same target audience. And the second big factor to figure in is the size of your audience. And that just means how many downloads are you getting per episode. Now, of course, this doesn't have to be an exact match, just sort of an approximate match. If your show has 500 downloads per episode, you probably aren't going to have much luck trying to do a promo trade with a show that has 100,000 downloads per episode. And if your show is already really big, you don't necessarily want to propose a trade with a podcast that's brand new and only has a few listeners. The idea is to have each of you benefit roughly the same. And I know what you're thinking. Sure, you know the size of your audience. Obviously, we all know how many downloads our own show gets, but that information isn't public for other podcasts. So how do we really know how to find out if a show has a similar number of downloads or a similar audience size? Well, it won't be an exact number, but there's a way to estimate and be not too far off. You can do this by using one of the podcast player apps. Now, one of the more popular ones is Podcast Addict, and that's the one I use on my Android phone. I love it, and I do recommend it. For this process, I'm going to demonstrate it on Podcast Addict, since I'm an Android guy, and that's what I use. If you're on iOS, Castbox does something very similar, so that's the app that you could use to get this same information. So here's what we do. You can't compare our show, we can't compare our show with another show based on the number of downloads, since that information isn't public. But we can compare shows based on the number of subscribers, because that information is available right in that app. Now, of course, you need to realize the number that you see there is only means the number of subscribers in this app, not the overall number of subscribers. But that's okay, because we don't need the actual real total. We only need to know how one show, your show, compares to other shows. So here's how we do that. So if we're sticking with the true crime example, let's say your true crime show is called Hitman, and there actually is a show with that name. So if the host of that show is watching, thanks for the use of your podcast for this example. So you go to the app and you find your own show, and you can see the app shows us all the details about that show. How many episodes, the date of the last episode, the average length, and of course, the description. Then, as you can see right there in the middle, it shows that this podcast has 3.2K or 3,200 subscribers. Not bad for a show that just has 4 episodes, actually. So anyway, your show has a little over 3,000 subscribers. Based on that, if you're looking for shows that have a similar size audience or a little bigger, you probably want to look for a show to trade with that has maybe 4,000 to 6,000 subscribers. And remember, that's just a suggestion. You can pitch a promo trade to a show with 20,000 subscribers if you want to. There aren't any hard rules here. So now we go looking for a show. And in this case, it's easy. We just go to the true crime category in the app, and all the shows are listed right there. So you can just scroll down the list. And as you can see, the number of subscribers are conveniently listed right there next to the cover art, so you can quickly see the number of subscribers for each one. So you find the show you want to trade with, and the next step is to actually listen to that show. Listen to a few episodes and see what you think of it. I mean, this is a show that you're potentially going to be introducing your listeners to. So you should be looking out for them. Don't waste their time by recommending a crappy show. Make sure it's a good show that you can be proud to promote to your audience. Then find the contact information for the host of that show and send them a message. Now for me, I prefer email, since that way I can kind of lay out the whole idea that I'm proposing, and there's an art to this as well. Don't come on too strong, like, hey, I found your show, want to do a promo trade? This person might not even have any idea what that is. They've never met you. They might think you're trying to sell advertising or something. So take it easy, introduce yourself, tell them about your show briefly, and then gently introduce them to the idea that a promo trade could be something that can benefit both of your shows. But again, take it nice and slow. You don't get married on the first date. See if they're open to the idea, and then you can talk about what kind of promo trade you want to do. Now let's talk about those 3 different types of trades and how they actually work. The first one, as I mentioned earlier, is what I call the firecracker. It's quick and it's pretty easy to set up. With this one, you simply create a 30-second audio file that describes your podcast. Basically, it's a 30-second commercial. And of course, the other podcast host does the same thing. The file should be in MP3 format because that's universal and everyone can play it. And you need to be very efficient with your words. You only have 30 seconds, so make those words count. And it should be interesting to listen to. Now for mine, I include a music bed as sort of a background to the words. Just makes it a little more professional. Maybe add some credibility. And definitely always include the website address for your podcast so that anyone who's interested can go out and find your show. So you create one, the other show creates one, and you each play the other's audio at the end of an episode. Pretty simple. So the first promo trade I did was this type, the firecracker, and I traded with a true crime show called Obscura. It's a pretty popular podcast, and the host is actually right here in Central Florida. And my show, just so you know, is called What Was That Like? And on my podcast, every episode is a conversation with a regular person who has been through some type of extremely unusual situation, like someone who's survived a plane crash, or got shot during a mass shooting, or got attacked by an alligator, all kinds of crazy things. I have the guest come on and tell the story of what happened firsthand. And what I found is that my audience, a high percentage of them, are also fans of the true crime shows. So I reached out to Justin, the host of Obscura, and I proposed this idea, and he said, sure, why not? So we each sent each other the MP3 files and played them, and we each got a bunch of new downloads and new listeners from it. And this is what the 30-second promo sounded like. This is what Justin played at the end of one of the episodes of Obscura. What Was That Like might just be the most intriguing podcast you'll ever hear. Each episode is a conversation with a regular person who's been through an extremely unusual situation, like Jeremy, who was bitten by a rattlesnake, or Jennifer, who accidentally killed someone, or Luke, who got caught smuggling cocaine. Real people in unreal situations. Listen and subscribe at WhatWasThatLike.com. So that's it. Pretty simple. I created the audio file myself, but if you wanted to, you can have it done pretty cheaply on Fiverr. But come on, you're a podcaster. You have the equipment. You can probably just do this yourself. Now we move on to number 2, the grenade. And this one, in some ways, it's kind of easier. And in this one, you and the other podcast promote the other show in the middle of your show. That's what mid-roll means. It means it happens somewhere after the actual content starts and before that content comes to an end, somewhere in the middle. That is part of what makes this so effective. It's right in the middle of the story. Now, as far as what is actually said, that can be scripted, but it's really more effective if you just talk about why you like that other show. And of course, that's what the other host does for your show. This is why you have to listen to the other show, especially for this type of promo, because you're giving it your personal recommendation, and you never want to risk losing the trust of your listeners by sending them off to listen to a stinker. So make it interesting, and as before, be sure to include the website address or some type of call to action so that the listener can find the podcast and listen to it. I did this one with another true crime show called Murderish, and it's hosted by a lady named Jamie, and we didn't do this one in the typical style, but that's the beauty of this. There are no rules. It's whatever you and the other host can come to an agreement on. Now, for this one, Jamie actually had her own personal story that happened to her, which was a good fit for my show. When she was 18, a strange man followed her home one night, and just a few minutes after she got home, she walked in her bedroom and he was standing there. So that made for a great episode for my show, and in exchange for her telling that story and promoting her podcast on my show, she read this great little promo on her show to her listeners, telling them not only that she was on my show, which made them want to come and listen to it because they love her, but she also told them she loves my show and she's binging all the episodes. And this is huge because her listeners trust her completely. So they're thinking, wow, if Jamie loves this show, I better go check it out. And they did, as you saw in the numbers I showed earlier. So this is what it sounds like. This is what Jamie did when she did that mid-roll recommendation on her show. It's just a little over 1 minute long.
I recently had the opportunity to tell a personal story on a podcast called What Was That Like? I was able to rehash the night a stranger followed me home and came into my bedroom. On What Was That Like? Host Scott Johnson talks to people who've experienced something highly unusual. In an episode of What Was That Like titled Whitney Was Shot 12 Times, Scott speaks to a woman who walked in on an active shooting and got shot 12 times. Miraculously, the woman survived, and she walked Scott through the terrifying ordeal. Wherever you're listening now, take a second to search What Was That Like and hit subscribe. There are plenty of mind-blowing episodes to binge. I started with episode 1 and I'm quickly making my way through the entire library of episodes. Listening to the episode titled Marina Was Stalked was a real eye-opener for me. Search What Was That Like, hit subscribe, and start binging.
Now, the only downside to that was that she didn't actually give the website address for my podcast. She just said search for the show and subscribe, but I still got great results from it, so it's fine. And now we finally get to number 3, the nuclear bomb. This is the mother of all promo trades. This is where you actually trade a full episode with another podcast. That show plays a full episode of your show, and you play a full episode of their show. Now, this is not something you just jump into and do it spur of the moment. You have to plan this. And the biggest thing here is you want to be protective of your audience. Think about it from their perspective. They subscribe to your podcast to hear your podcast. And now here you are giving them a different show to listen to. So if you do this, you need to find a show and listen to a bunch of episodes so that you know it's an absolute perfect match and that there's no question your listeners are going to love it. So it's only after that that you contact the host, introduce yourself, talk about his or her show, maybe even mention an episode or two that you especially liked. You want to come across as very personal. Then maybe toss out the idea of doing some kind of promo trade or episode swap and see if there might be some interest and just take it from there. The episode swap I did was just this past April with a show called This Is Actually Happening. And this is actually a podcast I've listened to for quite a while, and I recommend it. It's a great show. And it's the only show I know of that is very similar to my own show. The host's name is Whit, and he finds people with really crazy stories, and he has them come on and tell their story. So I knew this would be a perfect fit, and I knew that an episode swap would be great for both of our shows. So I emailed Whit and kind of threw out that idea, and I didn't hear back from him for a few days. So I was starting to think he probably wasn't interested, but the reason I didn't hear back was because he was taking the time to listen to some of my episodes. And that really sold him on the idea that our shows were a really good match and that we obviously have very similar audiences. At that point, we got on the phone, and I think that phone conversation was critical because that's when we really developed a great rapport. Each of us knew we could trust the other, and we were both pretty excited to make this happen. And it also worked out well because we both do shows every other week, so we both did this on our off week. So the episode we pitched as an extra episode for our listeners. I picked one of his episodes and played it, and he did the same thing for one of mine. So what I'm going to play you here is when Whit introduced my show to his listeners just before he played it. And again, the power of this, I just can't emphasize this enough. His listeners are getting this personal recommendation from the host of the show who they know and trust. And then following this intro, they heard the whole 1 hour and 20-minute episode of mine. So here's what his intro sounded like when he explained to his audience what was going on. And this is 54 seconds.
I know this is an off week for the show, but today we're doing something new. Often on social media, I see people asking what other shows are similar to This Is Actually Happening. So today I'm introducing What Was That Like by Scott Johnson, which is exactly the podcast you're looking for. Featuring real people in unreal situations, What Was That Like covers similar jaw-dropping stories, but with its own uniquely fascinating format and style. Scott and I connected, and I immediately knew I had a kindred spirit. We had so much to talk about, and we decided to share each other's shows with our listeners. So today's show will feature the full episode, Tyson Was Abducted, from the podcast What Was That Like? The episode's about a man who, walking through a parking lot one night, was jumped by two strangers and thrown into a car with no idea where he was being taken. You can find the rest of What Was That Like on all podcast platforms, or check out the website, WhatWasThatLike.com.
And you saw the results I got from that. Loads of new listeners and new subscribers, and he did too. So it's a win for everyone, especially our audiences, since they found out about a new show that they are virtually guaranteed to enjoy. So that's the basics of how promo trades work, and hopefully you can see that they are definitely worth doing. And for me, it's an ongoing strategy that I'll always use, but there's one thing, one word that I recommend you keep in mind and implement when you do these trades. That word is over-deliver. In other words, this is what I mean. You and the host will certainly come to an agreement about what each of you will do for the other one, but you should always do more than that. Promote that other show in your Facebook group, do a post about it on your Instagram, go on Reddit and talk about that other show. In other words, do more than just what is expected. Create a good reputation for yourself and your show as being someone who's great to deal with. It really costs you nothing, but that image you create for yourself will absolutely pay off big time down the road. So thanks for your time. Now go find a podcast and do a promo trade.